right. All right, all right. Hey, we're going to be wrapping up here real quick. Let's get this going here for the next segment where we have Steve Elliott coming on board. Thank you, Katie Moon, for your time and for your words. And it's not every day, folks, you get to touch a gold medal, for sure. All right, we're going to get you. Hey, let's thank Katie Moon one more time. All right, now, hey, we have Steve Elliott coming up. And he is from Alltech Solutions. He's the Global Vice President of Corporate Accounts. Now, here, let me ask you a question. How many people in this room have been out of the country? Raise your hand. How many have been to at least 2 countries? 3, 4. How about 119? This guy right here can raise his hand. Because he's been to 109, just found out, 119 different countries. And he's going to come and share with us about Alltech, what they do, and how it impacts you and your business. Let's give Steve a big round of applause.
Okay, I think I'll turn this on. Well, thank you for that introduction. And yes, I've had the privilege of traveling around the world for Alltech, visiting with the best producers in agriculture all over the world. It's been quite a journey for me. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I think I want to kind of look at how do we interpret science to help improve performance of our horses. And I want to do that from a standpoint as a horse owner. My family currently has a little over 100 horses. We're in the barrel racing kind of industry. And then also as a science collaborator, because science is important, but it's really, really difficult. And I think applying or interpreting science so that companies like DAC can utilize that is really important going forward. Because remember, when we do research on horses, it's difficult. Because horses are designed to be wandering herbivores. We heard from Dr. Tanya some of the challenges with that. But in order to really do science and make performance horses, we lock them up in a barn and want to feed them a couple of times a day. That's really a big challenge. And when we think of something like soundness, bone is very dynamic in horses. It's constantly changing. Actually, bone softens up when we put them in a stall for extended periods of time. And then it will reestablish itself based on the type of trauma or impact it's getting. And you'll see bone formations that vary depending on horses run around the track the right way or run around the track the wrong way. I mean, horses are really unique that way. And I think horses also, the challenge with horses is they evolved with what has been known now as the 3 Fs. It's kind of been popular here over the last 6 months or so on social media. The first F is friendship. Horses are herd-bound animals. So the more time we can allow horses to be together, where they can scratch each other, where they can interact. They've actually done research on this in horses that show that their serotonin, that they're calmer when they're out with other horses. With kind of crazy performance horses at times, it's hard to do. We can't do that. Stallions, we can't really do that. But that kind of complicates things a little bit. The second F is forages. We know that horses evolved to eat large quantities of forage. Now that can either be pasture and or hay, but really horses should have access to that 20 hours plus a day. It's really hard to do. Now there is some good science, slow feeding hay nets. That's actually pretty good science on that, on how helping horses adapt to like long-term exposure to forage. And then the final one is freedom. And freedom in the sense of freedom of choice. There's actually some data, some science now that shows that if you hang 2 different types of forage in your stall for your horse, he has the freedom to choose, I want to graze, I want to take some of this alfalfa hay, I want to take some of this Timothy hay, I have a choice. Freedom can also be a salt lick, it can be a molasses lick, it can be toys, etc. But horses need that freedom. But this complicates things when we're looking at equine research. Because remember, horses are companion animals, and unlike livestock species, we have to really be careful on the type of trials, research trials we do with them. We can't feed them and then sacrifice them and look at their tissues, etc. Nobody's going to kill horses. We can't get away with that. So it limits us on the challenges. Some other animals, production animals, poultry, swine, cattle, we can challenge them with a disease, etc., and see how they respond to different mitigants, what we're trying to feed them to help resolve that. We can't really do that in horses, and we're even limited on the amount of stress we can put on them. Exertion, the exercise we can put them through when we're trying to do exercise trials, because people are concerned about horses. They're considered companion animals. We have a lot of restrictions there. We heard a little bit from Dr. Cubitt about genetic diversity. That's a challenge. It's very easy for companies like Alltech. We can do trials with 1,000 chickens. We can do trials with 300 pigs, and they're basically genetically identical. It's hard to do that with horses. Even the research institutes that have horses, you'll have various bloodlines, various ages. It makes it very, very difficult. We have a little bit of an advantage at Alltech in our research facility. My family provides the horses currently, and they're basically all out of one stallion, so we take a little bit of that genetic variation away, but it makes it very difficult to kind of do that in typical research scenarios. And we also have to worry about numbers, what we call replicates. Once again, if I want to have enough power in a research trial that says I'm going to see something that I'm confident that can be repeated by somebody else, that takes numbers. And research institutes for horses just don't have those numbers, and that genetic diversity really makes it tough. So then, science people, nutritionists like Dr. Cubitt, she has to try to extrapolate data from other production species. Just because research is done in poultry and chickens or done in cattle doesn't mean that same type of product can't be applied to horses. But she has to extrapolate that data, called comparative biology. Well, it worked in that species. What's the titration? How much more, how much less do I have to feed if it's going to work in horses? How am I going to evaluate that? It makes it kind of tough. But the biggest challenge in horses versus other species that we consume is how are we going to evaluate performance? You have horses that are flight animals. You generally have a human involved. And on performance side, how do you evaluate that? We're limited on how much we can do with them on a treadmill or putting them in a round pen, etc. And there's always a human involved on the performance side. So even if I took the human out of it and did the trial, is that really applicable? Horse research is hard. And that's why consultants and nutritionists like Dr. Cubitt have to spend a lot of time looking at research from other species and say, is this applicable for my customers, for the horse people that really want to do better for their horses? So how do we look at it in horses? Like I said, we're limited on how much we can exercise them. Putting them on a treadmill is not very natural. And if we're going to put them on a track, we got a human involved. That's too much variability for research. So have we really made any improvements? And I like to use this analogy. We just heard from an Olympic athlete. What does this guy in horses have to do? You have any idea? Well, that's Usain Bolt, right? Ran the world's fastest 100 meters. And if we look at the 100 meters times over the last 100 years, we've made about a 10% improvement. Quite significant. Now, training, diet, like we heard about, those are all improvements. Track conditions, it's improvements. Not really genetics. We don't track genetics like that in humans. But we've made substantial improvements on human athletes. But let's look at horses. We can either look at the English Derby on the top or the Kentucky Derby versus the humans that run the mile sprinters in comparison to horses and or the marathon. And what you see is that humans, we've made quite progress. And horses, virtually nothing. There's only been 2 horses that's ran faster than 2 minutes in the Kentucky Derby in over 100 years. Everybody kind of knows about Secretariat. Monarchos was another horse that runs sub 2 minutes 20, 30 years later. And most people believe Sham, the horse that Secretariat beat, ran sub 2 minutes. But some of the horses that run in the last 5 years have run slower than the horses that won the Kentucky Derby back in the 50s. So as a researcher or a research institute, you're saying, how do we improve performance in horses? Because looking at that, I say we're not doing very well. But are we looking at it the right way? That's the challenge. This is my daughter, because I get excited about science, and she'll always say, Dad, so what? You show me all of these big words, you show me these scientific things. I can't see that. How do I see that in my horses? We're in barrel racing horses predominantly. She'll say, how do I evaluate that? You want me to feed this? I'll feed it. What's the benefit? What can I see as the benefit? How do I evaluate that? That's kind of humbling because I kind of get excited about science, but it's true. And for you and DAC, you want your customers, you want those horse owners to have the best for their horses. How do we know we're giving them the best? Well, it brings up vitamin E and selenium, some work that we've done at Alltech. And Dr. Cubitt mentioned this earlier about vitamin E in particular. And vitamin E and selenium work together. Actually, vitamin E, as you heard, is a fat-soluble vitamin. It can be recycled in the body, and it's recycled with a selenium-dependent enzyme. That was only discovered less than 20 years ago. So we can actually get more efficiency or efficacy out of vitamin E if we have the proper selenium in the diet of animals. That's kind of a novel idea. So I did a trial 20 years ago. I was so proud of this. I worked with a consulting nutritionist, Dr. Steve Jackson, out of Kentucky. He was consulting for one of the largest thoroughbred operations in Florida. So he agreed to feed the same feed to both barns. We had 80 horses, 40 horses per barn. All we did is switch the source of selenium. From organic to inorganic, everything else was ISO nutrition, okay? Exactly the same nutrients, just different forms of selenium. And after their first official work, 60 days later, we looked at something called TAC, and this is the antioxidant parameter. And I was so excited. I'm like, look, just by simply feeding a different source of a necessary trace mineral, we saw significant improvement in antioxidant capacity in these racehorses. This is one of those things that my daughter would say, so what? But to me, it was really exciting because we know, and some other things we saw was we had less fillies that kind of tied up, less down days in the barn that was on the organic selenium, etc. This was really exciting to me, but my daughter said, so what? I can't see that. I don't draw blood and do TX on my horses every day. Dear, you're right. That's true. But it gave us some guidance on things we could look at. Because at Alltech, based in Lexington, Kentucky, we deal in over 100 countries around the world. In 2007, we came out with a nutrigenomics center. Big scientific word, but actually that's studying the genome, the genes in the body. The human genome was quite popular back about 20 years ago. Everybody was looking at it. Well, Alltech built the first animal nutrigenomics center back in 2007. And what that does is just allows you to look at how the body responds, all the genes in your body, 24,000 genes, how they respond to different challenges and or nutrients, etc. So this is what we would typically do. If we do an experiment on chickens or cows or horses, we'd feed them a diet. It would go through thousands and thousands of metabolism type of situations. And then we would say, are they healthier? Did they breed better? Did they gain more weight? And some of these trials can last months and months, and we said, we found nothing. Well, the beauty of genomics is that we can take a sample. Now, this can be from the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. Now, this is generally done in production animals, so we can grind them up and take bone samples, liver samples, heart samples. But nonetheless, we run it through a scanner. It gives us lots of information. It gives us a data point on every gene. So 22,000 data points just from one little experiment. And sometimes we can see this in 24 hours. Where when I was in school, yes, I'm an old guy. When I was in school, it'd take 6 months to do a trial and then say, didn't work. Now we can know if we're going in the right direction in as little as 24 hours. That's really valuable information. The challenge is, scientifically, it gives us lots and lots of information. How do you interpret that? But the advantage, once again, if I want to see if something has a potential to work, if we have a new technology we want to introduce to DAC, and we're going to do that through performance horse nutrition, this is a type of science where we can try it, and if we see the right tendencies, then maybe we'll pursue it further. Because we're talking lots of data. We literally have billions of data points on the selenium I talked to you about. Billions with a B. But how do you interpret that? What's good, what's useful, what's not, particularly for the owner of the horses that we're trying to help? But for something like vitamin E and selenium, this is a perfect area that we can help Dr. Cubitt make decisions and help DAC to make decisions on do they want to create something or modify one of their formulas. So over on the left, you see that's the control. Then we have vitamin E at 100 international units. So this was done in a chicken, because full disclosure, I fed it to chickens, and 7 days later, one of them sacrificed themselves to science. And I ground them up, and we took samples from their intestine, from their heart, from their brain, and we did nutrigenomics on it. Well, for chickens, you can see over on the far right, vitamin E requires about 50 international units. Well, similar to horses, most people would feed double, triple the vitamin E. Important antioxidant, like Dr. Cubitt said. We like vitamin E. And then we had a product called Economase, which was based on that organic selenium I talked to you about in horses. And we did this genomic evaluation. That's a lot of stuff on there, but what you see is that blue means the gene was turned off, was not really affected. Red means it was turned on, and yellow means about the same. But what you notice is that all four of those treatments, there's a lot of differences in there. So one, there's a difference between NRC levels of vitamin E and double NRC vitamin E, as well as this organic selenium. We have really smart people that evaluate all that. This is another one my daughter would say, so what? But when we look at it on the horse side, once again, we look at 2 times NRC. Horses' requirements, 500 to 1,000 international units. We heard about the benefits all the way up to 10,000 international units. Vitamin E is expensive. Do we utilize it most efficiently? So we looked at it, 2 times vitamin E, NRC, typical we see in horse diets, 5 times NRC, and then just leaving it at NRC with this organic selenium. Once again, these are specific genes, hyaluronic acid binding, all these scientific words. Means nothing to me. Surely doesn't mean anything to my daughter as a horse owner. But what it shows us is there's a difference. 2 times may be plenty. 5 times, I don't know if that means better or worse. But it's also different from just leaving it at NRC and using a different form of selenium. So this is a type of science that's really confusing, but it can help lead us down the path to provide information that's useful to DAC to maybe create or adjust a product that can help your owners. Because putting the numbers in perspective, like I said, billions of data points. People hear billions, millions, billions, trillions. I don't think most people really appreciate the difference in those terms. Because I was visiting with Dr. Cubitt about back, we recently had a question come in to Alltech. A very passionate lady decided that she thought she needed more threonine in her horse's diet and wanted to know what was the best source to provide that. Now, I appreciate the passion and the quest for information, but trying to provide that by buying threonine and putting it in yourself, I don't think people really appreciate how difficult that is. Just for background, threonine requirements about 17 grams. Most supplements would provide 2 to 9 grams. That's 0.17 ounces. You know how little that is? That's almost impossible to weigh that out. And that's 5,000 milligrams, okay? We see lots of things that are 5,000 milligrams or less in diets all the time. You'd be familiar with milligrams per kilogram. All the labels that have minerals in them, they'd be parts per million. Parts per million milligrams per kilogram. But once again, do you really understand how difficult this is and how much technology, science goes into that? And how good DAC is at blending these supplements together? Because I go back to a million. What's a million? A million seconds is basically 11 days. So from now till 11 days from now at this time, that's a million seconds. That's a lot. 11 days. But then people say, oh, a billion. That's not really that much difference. A billion is 31 years. So when people say, oh, I can blend it up myself. I have confidence. I have this little scale in my kitchen. I can do this. I appreciate Dr. Cubitt, and I appreciate Randy and RJ's expertise on blending these, but I can do this. And then we hear numbers into trillions. We hear about U.S. government debt, trillions. Oh, that's not really different. Any guessing on how much time it takes to a trillion seconds? 31,710 years. So when you hear people say, oh, a billion, it's a couple hundred billion here, and it's now up to 27 trillion, that's a big difference. But that's why people like Dr. Cubitt and DAC spend so much time formulating these diets and making sure they're right. I appreciate the passion of people wanting to do it themselves in their home mixers, but on things like vitamins, trace minerals, and a lot of these other ingredients, you have to leave it to the experts. It is really, really hard to get down to that level. The other problem we find in horse studies, and this goes back to nutrigenomics, is how they respond, how the body responds according to access to food. Remember, when we do these studies, nutritional studies, we want to feed them in a bucket. First, we don't want them in a herd because there's always that grouchy mare who's going to dominate the pasture, so we got to make sure every horse eats what they're supposed to eat. And in research, we want them to eat the exact same time every day. Because this is looking at a mouse gene expression. This is just their liver cells in a mouse, that little gene I was talking about. So we're going to fast these mouse. They're not going to eat anything. I could use a little fasting myself. But if we look at the gene expression, once again, green is switched off, red is switched on, and yellow is no change. So Mr. Mouse, we're taking your food away from you. Your brother's donated his liver to me, and I'm going to analyze it. And that's what his genetic profile looks like. 2.5 hours later, his other brother is going to donate his liver to science, and you can see that already the genome is starting to change. This is 22,000 genes, some good, some switched on, some switched off, some no change. We go down to 5.5 hours, we go down to 24 hours. Look at the top versus the bottom. So this mouse's metabolism, this mouse's body, is basically responding totally different at the extended fasting. Horse research is hard. This is hard. This is just fasting for 24 hours. But back to the genomic stuff again. My daughter says, Dad, I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me. How does it help my horses? But I can go in there and these fancy computers can analyze that data, and it's something as simple as feeding organic trace minerals, which DAC uses in virtually everything, several different sources, versus the old traditional inorganic trace minerals versus a diet that had no trace mineral. That all just looks green and black to me. But this is ISO levels of trace minerals, same exact level, only different sources. And what we find is that 1,242 genes have changed just by different source of that trace mineral. That's pretty interesting. And there's really no difference in the genes from no added trace minerals versus the inorganics. Now that's 22,000 different genes. I'll be glad to send you that science. It'll take you 6 months to read it. But this just tells me, Steve, we need to look at maybe there is a big difference between these mineral sources, not only from performance, but we need to look at that. It's not an additive effect. We're feeding the exact same level that Dr. Cubitt's put in the diet. It's just as organic form versus inorganic form. So science matters, but these kind of things, these genomic trials, my daughter says, I don't care. But for us, we can say, well, maybe this gives us indication there's other benefits to feeding some of these technologies, not just on weight gain or not just on immunity or reproduction. Maybe there's other benefits. Because I'll think of something like feed, premix supplements. Like I mentioned, virtually all supplements contain some trace mineral, even macro minerals, calcium, phosphorus at times. And maintaining efficacy of that product from the time it's packaged right here in town to the time that the horse gets to consume it can be an extended period of time. We want to make sure that everything is still there. The problem is vitamins are kind of sensitive. We've known this for 30 years, and we just kind of try to ignore it. So we did some research on this. We had some time on our hands during COVID. So we did some benchtop research. And we took something like vitamin E. We heard Dr. Cubitt talk about how great vitamin E is. And this is basically just exposing vitamin E to different forms of trace mineral. Same level, just different forms, and how much was still there after 9 weeks. And what you see is that we lost almost double the vitamin E simply by changing sources. Now, wait a minute, vitamin E is a little expensive. We want it to be there, but simply by exposing it to a different type of mineral, we're losing quite a bit of that. And they looked at other types of minerals as well in there. But that was just exposing vitamin E to the mineral itself. And people will say, Steve, well, that doesn't really matter because it's mixed up in a supplement or it's mixed up in a premix. It has all the vitamins, it has all the trace minerals, etc. So I said, okay, we're going to do that. We have the concept of maybe we can feed lower levels. We don't need to overfeed trace minerals. I know they're inexpensive, but there may be some problems. So we looked at some different diets, and I'll be glad to send this to you. But what we did is look at vitamin A. Remember, A, D, and E are the fat-soluble vitamins. We looked at vitamin A, and we looked at lower levels of trace minerals. That's the one over on the left, OTM, organic trace minerals. TRT just means lower, NRC levels, versus our recommended levels, which are considerably lower, versus inorganics. But what I want you to see out of this is that in 12 weeks, we lost almost 30% of the vitamin A just by it being exposed to different types of trace minerals. I want my horses to have that vitamin A. Dr. Cubitt worked hard to formulate that. Dak worked hard to put that in that supplement. I want them to have it. But if I don't feed it in 12 weeks, I may be in trouble. The one that's really astonishing is vitamin D. We need vitamin D for bones. For those of you in chickens, we need vitamin D for eggshell quality, etc. In just 2 weeks, we lost 50% of the vitamin D by exposing it to the wrong source and the wrong level of trace mineral. And this was in a complete premix. 50%. That's tough. A lot of science goes into what our animals require. A lot of science goes into what DAC formulates for. These are the kind of things that are behind the scenes that research needs to be helping us with. Vitamins is the other one, right? Important to us. This is 90 days. So we did a premix, we did a trial with it, and then we analyze it before, we analyze it after the trial was over. It's about 90 days. In that 90 days, from the time it was manufactured to the end of the trial, when we evaluate again, 90 days, we lost 90% of the vitamin A. Vitamin K is included, blood clotting, vitamin K is included in a lot of horse supplements. We lost 94% of the vitamin K in 90 days. Biotin. we lost 20%. Folic acid, 66%. Thiamine, it's virtually in every B vitamin supplement we have. We lost 76%. Vitamins are sissies, pretty weak. They don't like anything touching them. The problem is things have to touch them because we have to blend them together to get them into our animals. But this is the kind of information I think is really useful to us. And looking at it over a period of time, the orange bar represents the organic minerals, the gray bar represents the inorganics. This is isomineral. We're not overwhelming the system. It's the same level, just different sources. That's why DAC uses organic trace minerals. Antioxidants. DAC oil, great product. But all oils, what are we worried about? Rancidity, oxidation, right? So we use antioxidants to preserve that oil as long as possible, to get all of the value out of that oil. Well, there's three main antioxidants used around the world: BHA, BHT, ethoxyquin. Well, we did a trial. We wanted to see if we expose that antioxidant just to organic minerals, we exposed it to organic minerals plus inorganic minerals, or we had inorganic minerals at higher levels because they're cheap. They're byproducts of the mining industry. Then we exposed it to antioxidants. The difference in the preservation of the antioxidant was astounding. This is anywhere from a 7 to 11-fold change. And a fold change is, for example, 20, if it was at 20 and it went to 80, that's a 3-fold change. So 20, 20, 20, plus 20 is 80. The fold change on this experiment is 7 to 11-fold. So if you're feeding a high-fat feed or a high-fat product, antioxidants are very, very important. But what you're exposing them to in the diet can have a huge impact on the efficacy of that antioxidant. So, when we were stuck at home and stuck in the lab, we did publish these trials. These are available on the internet. I can send them to you. We showed tremendous advantages of using these organic trace minerals versus these inorganic trace minerals. This is in vivo. This is on the bench top. I can't sacrifice the horses to gather that information, but very valuable information. But maybe there's some other advantages that we can sell to our customers, or me as a horse owner, or you as a horse owner can think about from things like these minerals again. Since the animals don't absorb all the mineral, they donate it back. And we use it as fertilizer. But some concentrated facilities, like we are right now, we're a little over 100 horses this time of year, that's a lot of manure that comes out. Everything comes out of the stall, goes in a dumpster, they come haul it away every other day. But in the pasture, that kind of builds up. And there's good information that suggests in other species, overconsumption of minerals has actually hurt the soils to the point that they can't grow as much corn, they can't grow as much grass, etc. So we looked at this in horses. We basically just split them up into 3 groups. We fed them a mixer pellet. One had inorganic trace minerals in it, added to it, typical horse feed. One had organic trace minerals added to it. And one we took the trace minerals out. Now there's still trace minerals in there from the grains, etc., from the forages. We just didn't add any. So 3 groups. These are pretty easy experiment. We have a washout period where we just take them off, all of that, just feed them the controlled diet with no added minerals. We start the adaptation. Some horses are finicky about eating it. Most of them eat anything. A couple days adaptation, and then we feed them those diets for 14 days, and we collect manure out of them. Pretty easy. They all had access to the same pasture was tested. They all had access to the same hay, etc. So we can do these experiments in less than 30 days. And we're doing these with a lot of our customers now. But what we found is that we collected manure from these horses, and then we grew forage, in this case Kentucky bluegrass, fescue, because we're in Lexington, Kentucky. We grew fescue hydroponically, and we fertilized those seeds with either distilled water, nanopurified water, Distilled water has zero value other than just water. The group that had organic trace minerals, the same level of inorganic trace minerals, or we use the perfect nutrient solution that would be recommended by companies that were growing Kentucky bluegrass. And we grew them in a greenhouse, perfect lighting, temperature. All they got to use for growing was this manure water or purified water. And this is what it looks like. We grew it for 40 days. Okay, so over on the left, you can see that's just deionized water. We got a little bit of growth, but plants need nutrients. We know that. They need nitrogen, they need trace minerals, etc. The second one is the perfect fertilizer. And then we move on down, and you can see here manure from horses that had no supplemental trace minerals. Now, they were still getting trace minerals because they were relying on their storages in their body, or they still get some zinc, copper, manganese, etc. from the grains that are used. And then the two on the end was either inorganic or organic trace minerals. So these are the ones, same level of mineral, manure coming out the back of your horse into your pasture. We've got 100 horses on 20 acres. Our little paddocks are precious to us. So when I look at final plant height, don't really see much difference. Yeah, the perfect fertilizer one was significantly higher compared to a couple of the groups, but basically, it looked like they were all pretty much the same. But when I look at shoot mass, how much actual forage was there, when I compare organic trace minerals to the same level of inorganic, we produced almost 20%, 17% more forage. What I would give for 17% more grass in my paddock, simply by changing the form of the trace mineral. And what was really interesting is the group that got no additional trace mineral, which meant they were only getting it from the grains, and coincidentally, in nature, trace minerals are organic, in corn, grass, etc. It was 16%. This would almost suggest that the overconsumption of inorganic trace minerals actually hurt grass growth. Not statistically significant. My daughter Riley, don't get upset. I'm not trying to make you understand the science, but if I can give you 17% more grass in that paddock, would you take it? That's just kind of an interesting side effect of utilizing this type of technology. This is what I try to make us focus on at Alltech. What about hair and coat supplements? Everybody has them, right? Everybody loves a shiny coat, good hair. This is a stallion that we raise and is the #1 stallion in Brazil right now in barrel horses. And most of these coat and hair supplements are based on omega fatty acids, zinc, copper, iodine, biotin, vitamin E, all the goodies. And people swear by them. The challenge is there's zero science on them. Doesn't mean they don't work, but I want to figure out ways that we can prove it scientifically because I feed this stuff to my horses. I know it works. My daughter tells me it works. But scientifically, we haven't been able to prove it. But we did it, Alltech. We actually fed animals organic versus inorganic trace minerals, and then we took some hair and looked at it under a microscope, 1,000 power. And what you see is that the one on the left, kind of rough edges on the hair, cuticles much smaller, versus the one on the right, much smoother. This is my wife. Well, I need to go get my ends trimmed. They're getting all ratty. Hair compounds. I got cabinets full of stuff. But there was no science. Now we can say, look, we can actually take hair samples and look at it. And the other thing in horses, our barrel horses, long tails, long manes, constantly in braids and bags, but it breaks all the time. Well, guess what? Now we can do hair tensile strength. And the difference between organic mineral fed, this is just 28 days, and inorganic mineral fed, the strength to break was much higher on organic minerals. So now when my daughter says, this really works, I can say, you know what? There's some science that says they do work. And this is now published, so we can say, this actually works. form of the mineral matters, and it can help your horse look shinier and have better hair. Everybody wants that. Now, if I can just get my wife to eat DAC rather than all the stuff she puts in the cabinet, we'll be in good shape. But moving on, there's lots of information on gut health and immunity. We know that the majority of that's in the gut of the horse. Lots of information on that through the years. In Alltech, we focus on that a lot. There's prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. There's all kinds of biotics that have hit the market over the last 15 or 20 years. They all have their unique place in the portfolio. The challenge is a lot of that work hasn't been done in horses, once again. So Dr. Cubitt and Dr. Duran, they got to extrapolate the information from other species and say, this will probably work inside of the horse. What level do I need to feed to get the maximum efficacy? That's hard to do. So we did it on one of our technologies. This is a titration. These are just science words. But basically it showed us that the more you feed, it actually worked. And this 2 is 2 grams. But as we fed 3 grams, it started to go the other way. So the people that send questions in and say, I want to feed this to my horse. And if Misty's feeding 2 buckets, I need to feed 4 buckets because it's going to make my horse better. More is not better. Titration studies are important, and Dr. Cubitt has to spend a lot of time looking at what's the right level. This was a published paper on one of our technologies, a prebiotic, and we looked at all these fancy names of bacteria that are supposed to be healthy for the GI tract, right? This one bacteria, scientific names, this one bacteria has been associated with disruption in the gut, diarrhea in species and horses. But it's also shown to go away when we use NSAIDs, bute. Unfortunately, we use a lot of bute at the barn with all of our horses, and we know it's disruptive to the system, and there's published research that says that. But what it doesn't tell my daughter is, how do I resolve that? Well, there's science now saying that maybe we can do that. But on the contrary, in this trial, I found something that was really interesting to me. The mold microbiome, we have scientists chained up in the lab that do all of those analysis and give us all the fancy research. But during this trial, it was IACUC approved, which means we have a committee that makes sure we're taking care of the animals right, we're not stressing them, etc., which is all good. But one filly that we had on trial, she cut her neck a little bit on a board in the fence, a fence board in the pasture, like all barrel horses do. I would have done nothing, but we had to have the vet come out and put some sutures in her, and she had to go on an antibiotic protocol where she was just SMZ TMP kind of protocol for 10 days. But what was interesting is that little bright green bar that I got the arrow on, that's an indicator of antibiotic resistance, which means that her microbiome, her gut, had adjusted to create antibiotic-resistant bacteria. That's not good. Veterinarian says, I want my antibiotics to work because I want them to be efficient, work effectively, and then I want my horses off of them. Well, this filly developed antibiotic resistance simply by going on a very common SMZ TMP. We've got bottles, cases of this stuff at the farm. But interesting, when we fed them this prebiotic, which does all this nice thing to the microbiome, it eliminated that antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Ooh, that's really important in chickens and pigs where we feed them antibiotics as a group when they get sick or challenged. We don't want to do that in horses. But now there's a technology that we can actually feed post-antibiotics, post-surgery, post-sickness, that can actually eliminate that antibiotic resistance that we now know is developed with typical antibiotics. That's interesting. That's a good story. My daughter understands that. Yes, we always have something on SMZs after traveling to rodeos around the United States. But now we know we need to be feeding this technology to avoid that antibiotic resistance. Calming supplements. Everybody has them. My daughter swears by them. Lots of people swear by them. It's probably the least researched supplement in horses. We assume that they work. We say chelated magnesium is shown to increase serotonin, makes us sleepy in humans. But if you look at it, it's not proven in humans either. It's just assumed that it works. And there's other ingredients, amino acids that are put in there, theanine. Once again, they think that it actually calms humans down. So we put it together in horse supplements. There's no real science on that. So we developed a way at Alltech. We have a startle response. Horses are flight animals, right? They scare them. They want to leave. So we did an experiment where these horses wore a heart monitor. We did resting heart rate. We brought them out side by side, scared them with an umbrella, and then we watched how high their heart rate was, more importantly, how fast they recovered. So did it really calm them down? Like I said, we're fortunate that we have 5 geldings, 5 fillies, all by my stallion, so we take some of the genetic diversity out. We do double-blind randomized studies, so the barn help didn't know which horses were on the supplement, which ones were not. They were either fed the supplement or kind of something that looked like the supplement, basically wheat bran. 7-day feeding period, scare them and monitor it. Then we switch them back and use them as their own control. And by that, I mean, if this horse was on the supplement, we did the test, we had a letdown period, and then we used their first test as the control for the second test. Because we're monitoring heart rate. In a lot of studies you see, well, we monitored heart rate, how they were before we exercised them on a treadmill, VO2 max, how long it took them to recover. But resting heart rate in a horse can be anywhere from 25 to 40. That's a 60% difference. So as a science person, I'm trying to see, does this really work? That's a 60% difference. And now anything over 50, heart rate over 50, we assume there's some colic or there's something stressing them. But resting heart rates range from 25 to 40. So by using them as their own control, it gives us more power to actually look at it. And guess what? It actually worked. I had to eat my words because I told my daughter forever, those things don't work. She swears by them. She uses them on the road. We have lots of customers that use them. And I was always say, there's no science. Now there is. They work. I'm not going to say exactly what was in it, but there's lots of them. Most of them are based on relatively the same stuff, and they work. And we've also developed a GABA product. You might be familiar with gabapentin. Gabapentin's used in pets to calm them down, used in people to calm them down, seizures in people. We've developed an organic GABA product. It's actually the precursor to the synthetic one. We fed it to the horses. We found an even better response. So stay tuned. That may hit the market. There's still some discussions on whether FEI is going to allow that to happen. The Olympic horses and FEI horses may not, but they represent less than 1,000 horses of the millions that are in the United States using calming supplements. And these were significant responses, 5 versus 5, using them as their own control. 5 versus 5, significant responses. It works. It works. For those of you who like calming supplements, congratulations, you proved me wrong. What about gut health? Digestive upset's always a challenge because we're putting wandering herbivores that want to be together in herds and we stuff them in a stall. My old stud horse is 28 years old, my legacy stud horse. He's never been turned out with anything but himself. And he's lived in a stall 20 hours a day most of his life. It's sad, but that's just the way it is. We can evaluate microbiome and all them fancy words and bacteria. There's lots of concerns about ulcers, etc. Hindgut ulcers, fundal ulcers, colonic ulcers, leaky gut syndrome. We can do lots of data to say we think we can help with that. For example, leaky gut. That was a big topic a couple of years ago. Lots of products for leaky gut. We can do research and look at things like occludin, Z01, which is an anti-inflammatory. And once again, my daughter says, Dad, I can't even pronounce that stuff. It means nothing to me. Does it work or doesn't it? And I said, well, on these markers, it works in animals. But to make it understandable to you, maybe I need to show it to you in a different way. So this is an IPEX cell line. So this is a porcine cell line. And by cell lines, I mean these are cells taken from an animal that we can immortalize, which means we can keep them together, we can keep them alive forever if we baby them and nurture them. Now this is a porcine one, because pigs and horses, at least in the upper GI tract, fairly similar. There are some equine cell lines, but they mostly focus on regenerative type of situations, cartilage, bone marrow. There's a fetal kidney cell line. Like everything else, horse cell lines it's difficult. There's nothing gastrointestinal on horses. There's a few on chickens. This is a very good one that's well known that we have for pigs. But this is called a scratch assay. So this is just like the lining of your intestines in a pig, small intestine. These are living cells, and we take a very, very tiny little scalpel and we lacerate them. So when we lacerate them, you can see we cut it, and then we monitor it 24 and 48 hours how much it heals itself. Now this is the control. These are some very well-known products on the internet, Dr. Facebook. And then this is our product that we have, that we've been working on, that I showed you the previous slide, with all the fancy words that my daughter says mean nothing to her. But this means something to her. I say, Riley, you see, we cut it. Within 24 hours, it was about 85% healed. In 48 hours, it's 90% healed. So that horse that's kicking at you when you throw a saddle on her because you think she's got an ulcer, it looks like we may have something that's going to help that. That other bottle of stuff that somebody gave you to try, it didn't work. We're not throwing anybody under the bus here, but this is just a way that we can do research to say, yeah, we're probably onto something. So now we're going to continue looking at this and see if we can actually come up with something that may help with ulcer mitigation. But many of the popular products that are sold on social media, one, there's no science on ulcers as far as being able to mitigate them legitimately that we know of, particularly the lower GI tract ones. But it's stuff like this from the lower GI tract, just cell line. We can actually show that we're on the right track. Similar to that nutrigenomic, that big building I showed you. It's a lot of complicated science, but I can do this in a week. Where before, I'd have to come up with some supplement, something I want to feed. I'm going to feed it to horses. If it's lower GI, I can't scope them. I'm going to take blood samples. I'm going to look at fecal blood samples, look at all this stuff. And a month later, Steve, it didn't work. Now, I can do the titration, feed it to this cell line, scratch it, and I'll know in a week if I'm on the right track. This is how I want science to be applied in horses. This is my mission at Alltech. I have lots of smart people, PhDs, DVMs, that do the science. But this is what I'm constantly challenging them with. So what? How does that help my horses? How does that help your customers' horses? How does that help your horses? Is there science? Is there a good story that makes sense? So that's what I have for you today. It's just kind of my insight, the way I like to see people use science, how I'm driving the program at Alltech to provide science to Dr. Cubitt consultants and people like Dak. We have a long-standing relationship, and we hope that goes on for a long time afterwards. Thank you very much. If there's any questions.
All right. Let's give Steve another round of applause. Thank you, Steve. You know, there's one thing that sticks out to me the longer that I'm here and around all the experts that are here. It is really makes a huge statement about how DAC products are different, how they stand out, why it's important for you to be able to share with the people that you're going to be selling to just what all the benefits are and how they work. And it amazes me the level of technology and all the support systems, kind of like what Katie talked about, how important the support system was for her, how important this is for you. And I think that's such a huge parallel with that. So again, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it very much. And hey, we have breakouts to head into. But before we do that, we got to get some DAC snacks away. So yeah, we got to get these DAC snacks figured out, all right? So I'm going to read off your name, and if this is the final list, I'll read off. And if your name is on the list, you get some DAC snacks to take home with you. And then we're going to talk about breakouts and how that works. So, Orva Burkholder, you get some DAC snacks. There you go. Elizabeth Miller, John Helmuth, Neil Miller, Laura Miller. If you guys are both related, you got double the win on that one. Shane Smith, Blythe Danner, Ida Anna Burkholder, Sarah, I want to say Mowry, Sarah Mowry, Wilmer Yoder, Emily Rydell, Joshua Schmucker, Paul Miller, Sarah Hensley, and last but not least, let's give a big round of applause for Marion Troyer. Marion, the last of the DAC snacks goes to you. Okay, so hey, we're going to breakouts. Now, how many of you got one of those white things when you came in, a packet on there that had all your information on it? If you got it, give me a big woohoo. All right, on there are where your breakouts are. Now, this is how the breakouts work. You're going to be in that particular breakout room the whole time. All the different people are going to be coming in and out. Now, if you need to excuse yourself, use the bathroom, get something to drink, you can do that. But that's going to be the room you're going to stay. So you're going to refer to that white packet that's up there. And then following the breakouts, you're going to want to come back because Randy has something extra special he's going to give you to wrap up the day. Right, Randy? Woo! Put the pressure on. Hey, last thing. If you filled out the survey that RJ talked about, that's so important that you fill that out. What is your takeaway? Tons of information today for you to walk out of here with. The place where you drop it off is right outside these doors. Make sure you do that. You don't want to miss out on the wisdom that will be shared from that going forward. So with that said, we have breakout rooms. You're going to want to head to your breakout rooms. Take a look at the white packets that came in. Are there ones upstairs? Two of them are upstairs, or two of them are they're pointing that way?